Welcome to Power Boat Talk, the podcast where we talk everything performance boats with your host, Joe Road.
Hello, welcome to Power Boat Talk. This episode is brought to you by SoCal Jet Boats with owners Brad and Brittany Martin. I had the pleasure of having Brad on episode 28 of Power Boat Talk, so go check that out. SoCal Jet Boats was one of the original online forums and is still a great resource for all kinds of performance boat info. SoCal Jet Boats also has an online store that has a fantastic selection of hot boat apparel and a full line of jet pump parts and accessories. SoCal Jet Boats is also a great supporter of boat racing out here on the West Coast, and you can find them at most ADBA and NJBA drag boat races and the Southern California Speedboat Club circle boat races. You can also find them on one of the stops on their California River Summer Tour, which is going on now. Follow SoCal Jet Boats on Instagram and Facebook, or go to SoCalJetBoats.com for more information. This episode is brought to you by BoatLoanGuy.com and owner Scott Angle. Scott will do his best to make your boat or RV purchase as quick and as stress-free as possible. Scott offers loans for as low as $20,000 and up to $5 million, which should be enough to take care of the boat of your dreams. He offers loans for as long as 20 years, and oftentimes he'll give you a same-day approval on no-doc loans. Scott guarantees the best rates in the industry. Follow Scott on Instagram and Facebook at RV and Boat Loans, or go to BoatLoanGuy.com for more information or to fill out an application. Today, I am on with somebody that's just powerboat royalty, been around for a long time and has just done a lot of stuff. So real privileged to have Jerry Gilbreath on today. You know, we've been trying to make this happen for a little while, but thankfully, Jerry, I got Jerry on. So what's going on there, Jerry?
Well, you finally caught up to me. What can I say? Down on the bay in Newport Beach, watching the boats go by, and life is good.
Awesome. So touch bases with you once in a while. See you at a few races. So you're joyfully retired and collecting a lot of cool boats and going to boat races nowadays.
Pretty much, that's my enjoyment. That's my happy place, is going to, back to where my heritage was, and I haven't seen a boat yet that I didn't like or would want to have, and life kind of presented me the ability to purchase these toys, and so I've got a nice little collection going.
Yeah. I'll have to see if I can grab some pictures and throw it up here when I put this out. But great GM boat with Jaguar engine in it, right?
No,
Lamborghini.
It's a Lamborghini V12. It's a Victory Team Qatar V12 that they use in Class 1 in the 2000s.
Yeah, that thing's awesome. And then, and I saw it last year at the LA Roaster Show. You had a K boat too, a Beesmeyer. And I think you had just restored it, the green one.
Yeah, I did. It was a boat that's kind of been around a little bit, and I watched after it for a number of years, and it finally came available. It was a naturally aspirated boat, and I always wanted to have. I love the look of a K boat and having so much power that you can't really use it all, but I like to tinker with it and build it and polish it and make billet parts for it, and so I found this boat. Actually, Tom Buckles had purchased it, was going to go K-boat racing with it, and he spent a bunch of money with it with Prime Marine, and they do a great install and beautiful work there. And so APBA changed the rule, which for the better, I think, that you had to have a capsule to race K-boat. And so Tom's boat didn't qualify for that. So I made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
Yeah.
And so I got a chance to grab it and restore it a little bit, make it pretty.
Yeah. Well, I think you restored it more than a little bit. It was beautiful. Man, there's so much to unpack with all the stuff you've done. And I don't know really what comes first. Did your early days of Salton Sea, Parker Enduro, Miami, or did your dad kind of start Gil Marine? Was that going at the time, or?
No, Gil Marine, actually, my dad's first attempt into inboard racing was for the very first Salton Sea 500. And I believe that was in 1962.
Sounds about right.
So, yeah, I guess that would be 1962. And he had built a wooden Glenelg hot rod from a kit that Diebold, there was a company called Diebold Marine years and years ago. And so Dad built it out of wood, and some of his friends helped him do it. And they put a Cadillac engine in it.
Wow.
Didn't know any different, and really, for that matter, there was just a few people that really knew what to do. Rudy Ramus, for an example, and Lou Brummett, and those types who would obviously then dominate the racing. But as luck would have it, my dad did pretty darn well, and people would ask him to build the fuel tanks for their boats, manufacturers, and so that's Gil Marine actually started as Gil Manufacturing, which made fuel tanks for boats.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, that's what he did, and then of course in the '60s and '70s they started having gas wars, and where the cost of gas was just ridiculous. Remember, it got clear up to almost a buck a gallon, right?
And you had to wait in line for it. Right?
And you had to wait in line for it, and so we were slammed. We were building tanks for pickup trucks as fast as we could, and I say we. I was at that time, I was 12, 14 years old, but my dad taught me to heliarc arc weld, and so I actually welded a lot of the Moon round tanks. Remember Moon?
Oh yeah.
The little round tanks.
Sure.
I welded those when I was 13 years old, and I could do a pretty good job. My dad would give me $3 a tank to do it. Well, as from a neighborhood with all the kids, and we looked kind of like the Bowery Boys, the Little Rascals. I'd take my friends all. We'd go to the Dairy Queen, and for $3 I could feed the whole neighborhood lunch. So I was a hero,
Yeah.
But I was doing what I liked to do, and without even knowing it, guys like Keith Black and Dean Moon and all these people that my father was doing work with and helping out, I got to know them, and I was raised around these guys and going to their shops and everything, and so I like to say a little bit of it rubbed off on me.
Oh man, great education.
Oh my gosh! I mean, really, the icons in hot rodding, hot rodding and boats were at that time pretty much the same. Hot rodding, I think, is a little further ahead than boating. From what you see now from a detail, and look what in any form of racing, whether it be IndyCar or off road, it's just really come a long way. But my dad was part of that, and I was part of it, and I was paying attention and getting back to the boat part of it. My dad's we wanted to do water ski racing, and so we started water ski racing when I was 12 years old, and that's what really got me and all the hots for hot boats and hanging around, loud motors and stuff like that. I really liked it, and I believe that the experiences that I got from water ski racing helped me learn how to read the water. Because when you have somebody, whether you're observing or pulling them or skiing yourself, you read the water. It's very important when you have somebody 100, 200 feet behind you on a piece of string that you're trying to keep up and keep them in the best wake as possible. So you learn a lot. You watch it, and then observing for people riding backwards, that's all you do is study the wake patterns. So I think that gave me a big advantage later on in my offshore.
That's really interesting observation. I've never thought about that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you got to really take care of that guy and kind of see what's coming before it gets there, right?
That's right. And then have an idea of I was never one to keep my opinions to myself, and I always thought that I could maybe figure out a better way to do something, and so my dad would let me just carte blanche go in and make a mess out of a machine or something to see what I could do, and that's when we created the Gil Bracket. So
yeah, that I think people forget about that. It was like you guys, that was basically, it was a setback bracket for outboards, and it was like the first one, and man, it went crazy.
Yeah, we well, because it worked. I mean,
Yeah,
it worked, and it was really simple by taking an outboard motor and putting it on the back. I mean, look at today what the Verados are
exactly.
doing. I mean, it's exactly what it was, and at the time when Dad came out with the Gil Bracket, which I own the pattern I own the patents to. Um I still have all the patents. I'm not sure they do me much good other than the fact that I own them. uh, but in those days, OMC had what they call a C drive, which was an outboard motor built on kind of their own little swivel bracket. There was a setback. They kind of copied what we were doing, and I only say that because when I say copied it, because they ended up paying Gil Marine a little bit of money for the patent.
Nice.
And yeah, so that worked out. That worked out pretty good for my mom. And anyway, yeah, so that's what we did. We made the Gil bracket, and I made the very first couple out of aluminum, bolting together, much like you would see in the '90s and 2000s in the
Hmm.
eliminators.
Hmm.
Uh, DCB started making aluminum brackets like that for setbacks for the little outboards, and that was quite a neat little niche. It worked really well.
And yours were all welded steel tubing, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
the one we did eventually ended up was all chromoly steel tubing that
Mm-hmm.
then Dad created and went hand in hand with the gill coating. It was a
Oh,
form
that's
of
right.
that was a form of powder coating that we ended up doing a deal with Mercury with, so that they would retain the rights on the gill coat. So it was something that Dad came up with on a formula that literally you could keep a piece of metal in salt water for 50 years and it wouldn't rust. Now, that's if you just dunk it. If you nicked it or anything like that, then of course, it would get underneath it and it would start to lift. But we never had to warranty very many gill brackets because of rust.
Yeah. I
That was
forgot about
never a
that
problem.
too. Yeah, you guys, I remember I grew up in Southern California, so we used to buy stuff from you, and yeah, I forgot about that too. Yeah, you guys, it was kind of the first kind of powder coating anybody, was
That's right.
using.
That's right. Well, Dad called it gill coat.
Sure. Sure.
And for those of you who are listening, I don't know if you guys remember, my dad's name was Jake, and he was an entrepreneur, and Dad didn't like to hear the fact that you couldn't do anything. He'd want to prove someone wrong, and so he was pretty stubborn about that.
Yeah.
And so he got along with Mercury really well, and they sold a lot of brackets and use them on a lot of things. And I think one of the very first big customers we had was with George Lender and on a triple catamarans, the 30-foot Chris Cat. And Dad put three of them down there. I remember I went down and helped him do it at Lake X, and they were bolting them to the transom in those days. And then we came down there with a set of brackets to put on there, and we picked up, I think it was 14 miles an hour the very first
Wow.
pass. The very
Wow.
first pass. You know,
Hmm.
14 miles an hour when you're looking for onesie twosies,
Sure.
that was a big
Sure.
thing. You know,
Sure.
so yeah, we did the gill brackets, and we made the first power trim in the 70s. We made power trim for the 135s and 150 straight inline six outboards, because in those days they just had shock absorbers. So we made a day we could have a power trim be able to trim the outboard motor.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not
Amazing.
nearly as
Yeah.
sophisticated as they are today, but in its day worked out really well, and it
Oh,
planted a seed. And uh, there's some real smart people out there today that know how to do with the
yeah.
computers and all.
Yeah. Well, we were talking before we got on. I mean, the computers just exponentially increase everybody's knowledge and reduce test time and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, you kind of can't compete with that.
No, with the computers and the CNC, but it lathes and mills and things like that, because it can recreate a product just over and over and over and over, and
Yeah.
never be any off in any dimension. It just recreates itself over and over, and yeah, it worked out really well.
Yeah. And another project you guys did, which I mean, it was huge, and it's still probably considered. You could still probably consider it as good as anything that's still out there. Is the exhaust, the Gil manifolds you guys did.
Yep. Again, most of the Gil Marine products, I was a part of it. It was mostly my father, and then I would take it to the next level. But Dad decided that he wanted to get into manufacturing of every kind of a part that you could to marinize an engine, and he had become really good friends with uh, Barry Lieberman from Harden
Harden
Marine.
Marine.
Yeah, and so we were making at that time a lot of the over the transom exhausts that just bolted to like a Nixon or a Nixon casting or an Edelbrock casting, which was the tailpipe.
Mm-hmm.
That we had injected water at the end. And remember, because when the jet boats were all the rave,
Mm-hmm.
you had to have water cooled exhaust over the back. And so we made those by the thousands.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that worked out really well. And then also we worked with some different chrome manufacturers in the area that we created a way that the chrome wouldn't burn off in 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually when you copper chrome something, within 10 minutes on an exhaust, it's going to turn blue, and then that's going to be it.
Sure.
So guys like Bassett and everything nowadays, they've got that all figured out, so they're
Yeah.
staying pretty nice,
Yeah. But your performance ones, the upstuff ones, which I think I think they were like the factory exhaust in the 500s, right? The Mercury 500s, I think.
Those manifolds and systems became standard we sold it to Mercury on their Bulldog 500s,
Yeah, there
and
you go.
quite a bit of when we moved from the black engine to the high performance blue engine,
Mm-hmm.
and they were standard on that for a number of years.
Yeah. And they're good. Like I said, to this day, I used to sell a lot of exhaust, and they're probably as good as anything out there still.
Yeah, yeah. They're not as sexy as the headers, but they're
No,
from a cost standpoint, they work and to be quite honest, they ran just as well.
absolutely.
They ran just as well. We
Yep.
proved time after over time that the manifold would work just as well if the engine was tuned the right way with camshafts and all. And it worked. That worked out a lot. That worked out really well for my mother.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you guys, I don't know what he sold Gil or whatever, but I think Corsa ended up with those manifolds, I think, and I think CP has them now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so. There was I was kind of out of it at that point. We sold to a fella named Jack Vinilak, who then sold to Corsica, and
Mm.
so then I just kind of dropped out of it, and I was really involved in my personal racing and racing teams and racing offshore and traveling all over the place doing stuff. So uh, in the 90s and 2000s, and that from that point.
Yeah. So then another great chapter. Let's talk about Mod VP. And you actually at
Oh
some
yeah.
point, Gil Marine tunnels, GMTs. How'd that all happen?
Well, I actually, I was really heavy into offshore at the time, building a lot of stuff, and I had ideas of what I wanted to do. And Bob Leach from Eliminator Boats had a pickle fork boat that he said, "Well, Jerry, with your Gil brackets, and like, let's see if we can make it so we can make my boat with this run with an outboard motor on it." And so we did. We did it in a little projects and did some testing on it. And again, that was kind of the hobby side of when I'd come home from a week or two at Lake X from doing something. I'd come home and have my little shop and be tinkering with these little boats. And I teamed up with Greg Foster um, as the driver. And so we got our first 4 or 5 attempts into Mod VP racing were in an Eliminator tunnel boat. And knowing me, I had to figure out a way to make it better. And they ran really well. We won the Parker Enduro, the 9 hour, in the Mod VP class, which I think was class 5 at the time. And in those days, there was rules. There were no rules. I mean, you could pretty much run whatever you want for 9 hours. And I think we ended up 4th overall with a stock Mod VP Eliminator tunnel with a motor that stock 225 Mercury engine, which was just, I mean, literally stock. We took it out of a crate, and I went to a local Mercury dealer and bought it, and just went to Lake Elsinore testing it all the time, and finally got it to run where we thought was pretty well, and we ended up winning. And in those days, there was a pretty good competition with Al Stoker, with John's Custom Marine and Levy Craft and just a lot of boats. Rudy Ramus had boats, and then how I got into I liked the way the pickle fork was, but there was a race that Mercury was sponsoring, a series they were sponsoring, Mod VP, and it was called the IOGP.
Oh yeah.
I remember that, and there was a circuit all over, and so it was more about turning, and it wasn't about marathons. It was some quick acceleration type turns and stuff like that. So I had purchased the rights and the molds of a 19-foot Spectra.
I love that mold. Love that hull.
And I purchased that mold, and I love the deck. That's the deck of a GMT, which I had to change it over and over. I'd be lying if I could tell you how many boats we built and threw away until we got to the design that we really wanted. I didn't like to experiment on other people's money. I'd like to build a boat and go out and test it myself. And if it was good, it was great. We could move it forward. If it was bad, we'd throw it away. And so I say I did a lot of testing in the dark because you don't look bad when you're testing in the dark. So that evolved into the Mod VP GMT, which was an 18-foot, which today people I hear still called it kind of a baby Stoker, kind of because the Stoker was a V-bottom boat that they had added some tunnels in and lifting strakes and that, and then Rourke Summerford with the STV. So there was some pretty tough competition in those days, and I was lucky enough to be in the inside with Mercury through my Offshore, and they opened the doors to me for as far as outboard opportunity to race and see what they were up to as far as new two-cycle outboards. Nothing like what it is today. But when we first started racing Mod VP, like I said, we had 225 horsepower, and that was it. I mean, that was at 6,000 RPM motors. When the last year that I raced Mod VP with Greg Foster, that we won like Lake Havasu, the World Championships in Lake Havasu, our powerhead was a solid billet motor that the only thing that looked like a Mercury was the cowling.
Yeah.
Everything else was different. I mean, we had electronic fuel injection before anybody heard of electronic fuel injection on an outboard before.
Yeah.
So, but again, the cowling never came off at a race.
Yeah, Mod V, it was so competitive and everybody was in it. It was kind of factory wars, right? Like everybody.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, with the Lake Havasu Classic when it first started, it was absolutely factory wars. And most of the guys that I knew and met at Mercury was, like the early on people like Don Pruitt and Gary Garbreck, who was the head of Mercury Racing at the time, kind of took me under their wings, and with my uniqueness of the way I could rig some boats and mechanically figure out a way if there was a part that needed to be created, I could create the part and do it fairly quick. It worked out. So I had my own little spot down in Lake X and could just try whatever I wanted. I mean, there was just hundreds of propellers and things that you could just try, just one after another. So one thing about Mercury is they wanted proof that something was going to work well before we'd show up at a race. It never went to a race that we weren't tested, and I learned that. I learned that early on from Keith Kafer himself. So I had a lot of great mentors over the years in all my facets of racing, whether it be outboards or inboards or unlimited or offshore. So, yeah.
Unfortunately, Greg Foster passed away last year, but I know you had a
Yeah.
long, good partnership with him. You want to say a few things about him?
Oh, well, yeah. I've never met anybody that wanted to win as much as Greg Foster. I mean, his desire to make that boat go as fast as it could possibly go, and be willing to work on it to make it go fast. I mean, I could call him up and I say, Greg, meet me at Lake Elsinore in 2 hours, and he'd be out there ready to go do testing to try something. And that was kind of my test bed when I was out here in California. And Greg would show up, and we'd have, I'd have two Del Taco boats on a trailer, and we'd test one against the other. And that was the best way for us to do it. And like I said, Greg just tried really hard. Now, he tore up a few things, but there was no one ever that tried any harder with Greg. He had a lot of ability. I don't think Greg had as much natural ability as he just had a big desire to do well with it. And Greg was very mechanical minded himself, though. He come with pretty good ideas. He was pretty much had a lot to say about the bottom design of the Del Taco boats that we did, and for whatever course we were trying to do, whether it was a long straightaway or a short straightaway, we pretty much changed that. And then with guys, Bob Herring, helped us with some propellers at the time for outboards, and these are back in the days when there was a Mercury lab, but they didn't call it lab finishing in those days. It was just a prop shop, and it was just four guys. And there was a guy, Bob Hetzel, was the head of the prop department for Mercury Performance Products, and so he and we'd talk about props and stuff, and the rake of propellers and stuff. Where today it's pretty common, in the vocabulary of propellers, talk about rake and pitch and setbacks and all the other stuff. But 35, 40 years ago, we didn't do that. We just lucky to get a casting and try to work on it and see how thin we could make it before it would break. And then we had the ideas of make them out of billet when the CNC came along, and Bob Herring had a lot to do with that. So again, I've worked with a lot of very smart people.
You said with Greg, he was really mechanically inclined and knew a lot about, and I mean, I would think as far as a driver goes, that really helps the cause, right? When he can come back and tell you what he thinks it needs and what it's doing, and you can understand that.
Well, besides, Greg and I are best friends, and we talk the same language. But after a race, the races were 3 weeks, sometimes a month apart. We'd have time to discuss what happened in the race and what he was doing and what could we do to make it easier for him to control the boat. And once you're in control of the boat like that, you can make it go faster, and make it more efficient. So speed to me is just making it more efficient, whether it be propeller slip or the height of the gear cases, and everything's kind of evolved. Back to original Mod BP days, you weren't allowed to change the water pickup levels. The water pickup had to be on the side of the gear case. Okay. So that pretty much limited how high you could go. So there really wasn't a rule how high you could run your motor.
Okay.
But there was a kind of a unforeseen rule, is that you run it too high, you're going to burn your motor up. Right? So we ended up making the gear cases that had little scoops and things on the side that would help trap motors. But with the new bottom water pickups and stuff like that they have today, and the type of water pumps, you can run pretty much as high as you want. And that all goes back. That all goes back again to the Gil Bracket, because with the setback on the Gil Bracket, it allowed you to run the engine between 3 and 6 inches higher than you would normally mount it on the back of a boat. See, and still get water to it.
Sure.
Water, you pick that motor up out of the water, and it's a lot of less drag, and that's why it would go faster. Again, one hand fed the other on
Sure.
evolution of products.
Yeah.
And so that gave me a little bit of an advantage, and I recognized that. So back with Greg, Greg, we won a lot of races, we won a lot of championships together, and he'll truly be missed. And Greg, with the reputation that he had, he was always smiling. He loved it. I mean, we go to the river. I have a house out at the river, and his dad and Greg, and you hear somebody out on the river at 5 o'clock in the morning, and that'd be Greg out there running, and we'd laugh and say, "Oh, he's testing." Well, he had probably 20. Ron Hill would give him propellers, and Greg would go out there and test every prop, and just up and down the river, and so it was fun. But yeah, I really miss that guy.
Yeah, just getting his reps in, right?
Just getting his reps in, and I tell you, he had a feel for it of when you know he only blew over a couple of boats. He only blew over one GMT, I mean a real blower, but and it was years later that he finally admitted that he was messing around with Art Williams had a ET boat that they were running side by side, and Greg went over and waved at him, and he got caught in his booster tail. And so he blew it over, and at the Enduro. That didn't make me real happy, but what are you going to do? At least he wasn't hurt.
Yeah. And man, and all the miles he had on stuff, if that was the only time that happened, that's pretty good.
Oh yeah. Now he wrecked a few sea bowls and things like that in his day, and had some pretty big wrecks. And but he that's why you didn't call him fearless for nothing. He'd go out and he'd run it. Plus he'd test anything.
Yeah.
He'd love it. We'd put crazy things on. We had 6 blade props. We had 9 blade props. We had all kinds of things. So just to try. So.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for talking about him. That's great.
No. Yeah.
So tell me about some crazy offshore stuff. I think you had something to do with the Al Copeland stuff.
Yes, that was actually where I got my start in offshore, as far as the big show offshore stuff. Again, this was back in the day where it was just kind of good old boy racing, and I was hired by his crew chief and throttleman at the time, Bill Saroy. And Bill was, I would call him, he would be my mentor into offshore. And so Bill would hire me to build several boats for Al Copeland out of the Miami area. So because there were some things that Bill wanted to do differently than out of the box. And at the time there was, Bobby and Jax were riggers, and that did all the scarabs and cigarette. Arano had his shop, but Bill wanted to take us either I guess the first one I rigged for them was a scarab, and with number 5 drives on it, and number 4 drives, and I welded a set of drives that we kept going up again, trying to simulate our Gil Bracket to see how high we could make it. The problem was that we could run the drives really high, but the drives wouldn't last because they were so far out of the water that we used the water to cool the drives, and the gears would melt. But I remember the very first surface drive. At the time, Howard Arneson had come out with the Arneson drive, and he was kicking everybody's butt in Class 1. Sammy James and a guy named Tony Garcia had a wooden 40-foot Cougar with a couple of Arneson drives on it, and they won the races pretty easily. In those days, we were running number 3 drives. And so Bill decided, and I decided, you know what, we're going to go back to Lake X, and we of course reversed engineered, and we measured where Howard had his propeller, how high it was on the bottom of the boat, above the bottom. So we took a number 3 drive, because that's all we had, and I made brackets out of metal and everything, and put a couple of number 3 drives up at that angle, at that height, and it only went 3 lengths of the lake before it blew up, but it went 15 miles an hour faster.
Oh, no kidding. Oh, yeah, I got something here.
There we go. There we go. Now we see what, then it all kind of comes together, Howard was a really smart person, and when that drive came out, you look at a lot of things differently. Where we found out that the reason that the drive ran was because of the position of the propeller, height-wise relative to the bottom of the boat, from a drag standpoint. The
Oh, okay.
coefficient of drag, that big old gear case underneath there would cost you, but you get rid of where it's only just a propeller in the water. Oh my God! Oh my God! So it took us a while, and we blew up the drives, and finally. I can't remember if this guy named Bill Kasker was the head of engineering in those days for Mercury. We ran through that budget pretty quick, but he saw the light on the tunnel that, okay, what do you guys want to do? And so I said, well, just sell me some cases. And I took some number 3 drives and I cut them all apart and we welded them together and made that was the very beginning of a number 4 drive. Number 4 drive. And again, I don't want to take credit for everything because Bill Soroy was a big part of this, but I did have my hands in it for sure. And so we made these drives, and we showed up at the next race, and I'll never forget. It was at Marathon, and usually the race was over going to the first turn, but we actually beat the Arneson boat to the first turn. That was the good news. We didn't make it much further than that, but we proved to Al Copeland that we could make a boat that would be competitive. And he said, well, how are we going to do that? He said, because I want to win every race. He was very flamboyant in those days. We're talking in the 80s now. We're talking in 85, 84, in that era where things are wide open. And the shall we say, the smuggler guys were involved in things. And so money wasn't an object.
Yeah, they were heavily financed, right?
They were heavily financed, yeah, for sure. But they had surrounded themselves with, as far as from a racing standpoint, with some pretty darn smart guys, And the guys that I knew, they were like myself. So I was in love with the engineering part of racing and stuff like that. I wasn't obviously into drugs or any of that other kind of stuff, nor did I ever. I mean, I had opportunities with the smuggling part of this and that back then, and that just wasn't me. And the people that I hung around with, that wasn't their style either. So, fortunately, it'd been pretty easy to get caught up into that thing. And that movie, that was it called Concrete Cowboys, with the KS&W story. And I tell you what, that's really true. And Ben Kramer.
Is it really good?
Oh, it was right on. I mean, just right on. So anyway, so they financed a lot of opportunistic things, propellers and drives, and they'd made deals with Mercury, because Mercury was selling parts. Mercury wouldn't want to just let us have anything separate to ourselves, because they sold parts. So whatever we made, they would have to have. And in those days, there was a guy named George. What was his name? George Sorales. George Sorales. He had a boat called Merc Cruiser Special, Maggie's Merc Cruiser Special. And and he had the number 5 drives on it, and the 4 drives, and the welded drives, and all that stuff. And I don't know this part of it, because you did the interview, I think, with Fred Kiekafer. When Fred got back into the picture, when he came out with the number 6 drive. I remember I was at a Miami boat show, and I was doing some stuff for Al Copeland, and Al and Bill Soroy and I were invited up to this suite at the Marriott, there at the Marriott docks, where the boat show had the in-water show. And Fred, you got to come in. You had to leave all your phones. You couldn't take pictures. You could do anyway. He had up in his hotel suite the number 6 drive. It caught everybody totally out of surprise. I mean, this is the most beautiful thing, and you have to give Fred credit for that. And that was really cool.
Oh, and you guys really had no inkling that something like that was coming?
No,
Wow.
not because see, there was a couple of companies that were intertwined. There was obviously Mercury and the Mercury Performance Products, but then there was Kiefer Aeromotive, I
Right.
think
Aero
it was
Marine, right?
Aeromarine,
Mm-hmm.
which was
Mm-hmm.
Fred's dad, and
Mm-hmm.
then Fred kind of got in the how that all worked out. So we kind of lost touch with him at that time, and there was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
secrets going around, and I don't know if you know ever heard of the name Gus Anastasia. Gus was
Oh
the
yeah, sure.
Gus was from Wellcraft, and so Fred and Gus uh, did this secret project, where Gus supplied boats and some guys to do the rigging
Oh, okay.
stuff, and when they would do their testing on it. But yeah, it was pretty cool. So
Yeah.
of course, we immediately wanted, yeah, gimme. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
Al had to have that for sure.
Yeah.
And of course, I think I skipped over a part that I think was kind of interesting that I liked. Back in those days, there was the need for speed, and everybody wanted to have a record or create a record. Well, when Al pretty much asked me one day, so I want to have the kilo record for a Class 1 boat. The Class 1 boat kilo record, I think at the time was like 110 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
He said, well, how would you do something? I said, well, we figured it out that you're allowed 200 or 2,000 cubic inches and da 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 da. So I figured out that's when I built the 8-engine
Mm-hmm.
outboard boat with the power heads mounted inside the boat.
Yes.
You remember
Yes.
that boat?
That's what I was getting at. Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I did that. Noah saw that was one that we kept under wraps. It was my contract. Nobody could see it. Built it out in California, and took Mercury gave us 8 power heads, and I proceeded to make mounts and everything, and exhaust systems and everything. And I mounted the power head instead of up and down on top of the motor. I laid them on their side and hooked them
Mm-hmm.
together with a series of Gilmer belts, which are basically blower belts,
Oh
and
my gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
I had blower belts hooked together. And I had worked with Andy Casale at Casale Engineering, and I put in and out boxes on each output of each power head, so I could shift and engage 3 engines or 6 engines or 8 engines.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, I could turn engines off and add them as we were going, depending on and what we were doing. Because in order to qualify to run a kilo, you had to finish first, second, and third in a 150 mile an hour, 150-mile race. So you
Oh.
couldn't just build a hot rod and go out and let's call it an offshore boat. You had to prove that it was an offshore boat. So we took it to we debuted it at Treasure Cay in the Bahamas, and Al was so paranoid about everything that he had a full-on exorcism done on the boat.
Like, seriously?
I'm serious. Yeah, I have pictures of it. It's fun. It's the funniest thing. We had priests and everything there, and so and we decided to we ran six power heads instead of 2-liter power heads. We ran 2.4 EFIs stock power heads that I converted. They had 6 engines, and the record for a completed race at the time I think was like 96 miles an hour average. We averaged 110
Wow.
the very first time out, and we got in a little bit of a hassle with the APBA. They said, well, that's really not fair. That's not within the intent of the rule. And so with Al's wherewithal and everything, we got a chance to run it in the kilos, and we ended up setting the kilo record with that boat. And that was the last time we could run it.
Wow. What was the kilo record?
I can't remember. I believe that the kilo record when we first wanted to break it was like around 115 or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and we were in the 50s, 150.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
And was this, which drives was it? Where you were using 4s or 5s or?
We were using 4 drives that I had
Okay.
welded together again because of the the boat that this boat was a wooden Cougar,
Okay.
and with the way this low freeboard as we had decided in this thing, that's why we laid the engines over and everything like that. The height of the drive. So I had 4 individual transmissions hooking up each engines on each side through these Gilmer belts, 4 engines on each side. Plus I had forward, neutral, and reverse because that was part of the rules we had to have. And I had that hooked I machined that right into the drive itself.
Jeez.
So that was a fun project.
That's great. And tell me, was it 2 drives or 4 drives?
2 drives.
2 drives. Okay.
Two
Oh my gosh.
drives, and like I said, we couldn't come on plane with all the engines because we would wreck the gears. It was too much power. Remember, in those days you were allowed 500 cubic inches per engine for a naturally aspirated motor, and in those days, 750 horsepower was pretty good horsepower. Well, our 2-liter, we could have 4 2-liter motors, which were just slightly less than 500 cubic inches, and each one of the motors made 350 horsepower. So
wow.
yeah, so we had 1,400 horsepower. But we had to figure out how to get it all to go. But
yeah,
that was my job. So that was a fun project to do that. That was one of the ones I'm the most proud of doing, and then that got me talking with Mercury again. They wanted to get into unlimited hydroplane racing, which I begged them not to do. But anyway, so I built the Aerono Unlimited with a couple of
tell me about that.
I remember, so I did that.
Yeah,
and that was a fun boat. I that's the closest I ever came to dying. I was sitting backwards, testing that boat in the back with the drives because we were blowing the drives. It's just too much power through the drives, and so I had made a console in the back, and the driver at the time was a guy named Buck Thornton. I don't know if you remember. Buck was a Formula One Mercury factory team driver. So Buck was driving, and I took the rear cowl off, and I sat in the back and made a console for myself, and I had all the pressure things because we didn't have a data acquisition in those times, So I just set it up. And anyways, we were at Lake Butamore, and where Mercury factory is up in Fond du Lac, and we went into a turn, and one of the drives broke off, and we barrel rolled. There I was in the back seat.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but I survived that one.
My gosh.
And yeah, that was kind of fun.
Did that ever make it to a race or ever do anything with it?
We made it to a race. We did fine. We qualified fine. The problem was a tunnel boat wants to either turn hard or not turn at all. Wants to go straight. Well, an unlimited hydroplane, all they do is slide through the turns. These make huge turns. We could beat them down the straightaway. We had plenty of speed on them. The boat would go 200 miles an hour. In its day, that's pretty damn fast.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, in those days, an unlimited would run. Oh, they'd say they could run 160, but I never really saw it. But they did qualify at 135, where we could qualify at about 120. And they would just get us through the turns, and so that it just wasn't a really good thing. So, and then Fred Howenstein decided that he and his brother Jim Howenstein would take some of my motors that I had done and mounted in an unlimited hull and go try it. That didn't work out to prove to be very well, but fortunately, that wasn't me.
Yeah.
That wasn't me. But so back with the Copeland stuff, when we did the outboard, and they did a deal where they wanted to do like Miami to New York race for
and like endurance stuff
for endurance stuff. And remember in those days there was guys like Tom Gentry who was he spent a lot of money and hired some really good help, some really smart people. Billy Dunsmore and his father, Race Aero Turbo. That's all started with the Dunsmore family. And then gosh, I remember going into their shop one day. in Torrance, and they had 200 motors.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, 200 motors. It was just all Tom's stuff for the race boat because
Wow.
he had a 4-engine super boat, and actually had a couple of them. Then he had a triple engine Scarab, and then he built that 110-foot boat that he wanted to do the record from
The ocean thing.
the ocean thing, a crossing
Mm-hmm.
thing. So yeah, so there were those guys, and George Morales, and the guys, from Apache, Ben
Oh
Kramer.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They were part of that marathon, group where they want to race to. They wanted to do a race to Cuba and back, but that didn't seem to work. But so there was a whole bunch of things like that, and the guy from Europe, Fabio Buzzi,
Oh sure.
was part of that deal, and so I worked when Bill Soroy went to work for the Japanese guy Yashiro Katami, who bought. He made Superhero out of what the boat company was that he bought the Bootsy design
Mm.
for the diesel C-Tech engines and stuff.
Mm, okay.
So I raced in Japan a few years, racing diesel boats over in Japan with him.
Wow.
So that was fun. That was a 4-engine diesel.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
That was fun. I didn't care much for diesels until I raced them myself, and I thought, that was pretty cool. It's stink pots, but man, the suckers would go.
Yeah, never break, right?
Never. And, they run 3,000 RPM.
Yeah.
That's it. It's just like
Yeah.
driving a Peterbilt truck down the 605 freeway. You didn't throttle it either. Once that thing built up enough boost, you just let it rip.
Really? Really?
And we remember that boats, they had the big wings on the top.
Yeah, sure. Uh-huh.
And when the wing effect would take apart, you did never throttle it. So to go through a turn, all I do is just lower the flaps, leave the engine wide open, and the problem was the more flap you give it, the faster it would go because the boost would come up on the engines. So it was pretty scary.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
and we lost when Fabio was killed in the boat similar to that when he did the run from Monaco to where he was going in. Where was he going into? He went from. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank.
I don't remember. I just read about that, and I can't remember why I looked it up.
He was going to Venice.
Yeah.
And he miscalculated, and instead of going in through the cut, he went actually into the dam at 80 knots.
Yeah, yeah.
That didn't work. So,
yeah.
But it was too bad. But there was an entrepreneur there. Fabio did a lot of neat things, who I became friends with, and when I was racing offshore with Matt Alcone, we would go down to Argentina once a year and race, and I met a lot of really neat people down there at their engine facility that Fabio had, and and he shared it with me because I wasn't really going to race Z-Tex. If I did, I raced his. So
yeah, can you imagine starting to designing and building an engine and producing an engine? That's unbelievable how you do that.
Yeah, and see, that's kind of where I got the rub with the APBA and all that kind of stuff because I grew up with the first rule is there is no rule. And if you could create a product and you could use it and have an advantage, so be it.
Right.
But then when Michael Allweiss and these guys started coming out with these rules that everybody had the same engines, the same this and the same that, I proved that was not going to be the case because the very first year that they had Supercat, I won the first 7 races in a row. And they said it was going to be the most competitive. So they thought I was cheating, and they tore me down, and they did this, and they did that. As a matter of fact, they even kicked me out of APBA, said that I was cheating. I have a letter that said I was kicked out of APBA because I was cheating. I was not found cheating, but they knew I was cheating, but they couldn't find it. And
That makes a lot of sense.
so that's Hugh Fuller and I raced together, and then that's how eventually Johnny Tomlinson and Hugh got together when they started racing the Drambuie boat together. So
So when you won those Supercat races, what you just had the combination figured out and they didn't?
I took a boat that a guy, a 36-foot skater that a guy had raced for 4 years and never won a race. And so Hugh had just purchased all of the Alcone equipment, trailer, about everything. They bought engines, drives, props, everything. And so they always came out with this new class called Supercat. And I mentioned it to Hugh, and he said, "Oh yeah." He said, "Let's race that." I said, "Well, let's not build a boat. Why don't we? I'll see if I can find one. We'll lease one." So I found this boat in a warehouse. Had been sitting. I found it. I took it to Lake X, and I kind of went through the rule books and saw where Mercury could Mercury wanted us to use their engines exactly the way that they sold them to everybody else. I said, fine, they'll do all that. So I went to Lake X, and I spent 2 months at Lake X.
Oh my gosh.
Dialing this thing in. And I mean, I had every kind of drive. I had every kind of things. But for the kind of things that I did, and I can talk about it now because it didn't really matter, but the rules weren't explicit enough to tell you things that you couldn't do. For an example, a number 6 drive has twin shafts that go down. It has a splitter in the middle and twin shafts that go down to the pinion gears on the prop.
Yeah, twin pinions, right?
Right? Okay. Well, those were for if you had 1,000 horsepower. Mercury had 1,000 horsepower package at the time, right? So I just decided, and Bravo drives only had a single shaft, so I only ran one shaft on the prop shaft. So by the time and then the other rule was, George Linder was the head of tech, and I asked George, I said, how do you define what a dry sump gear case is? He says, well, if you have 5 gallons of oil in your drive, that means it's a wet sump drive. If you don't have 2 gallons of oil in it, that's a dry sump drive. I said, okay, fine. So I took a dry sump drive and put 5 gallons of oil in it, and it went just as fast as just a regular dry sump. Right?
Wow.
So anyway, just little things like that. And,
Sure.
Getting the balances right and getting a set of propellers. I mentioned the guy's name at the time, Bob Hetzel, who was the head of Mercury's lab shop at the time. And I would get, usually at Supercats in those times, we were running between 30s and 32 pitch propellers.
Okay.
I'd order 6 or 7 sets of propellers of the same 30s, 31s. And I would match the sets. I'd go out and run them and make sure that the left prop was turning the same as the right prop and biting the same and making sure that the boat's in balance. Because you know yourself from riding in a catamaran, if you get it running just perfectly straight, the thing really hooks up and goes. And so that's kind of at the time most Supercats the first year of Supercat that ran, they would run about 118 miles an hour, and I could run 130.
Wow.
But again, with a 4-year-old boat that no one else had. But then all whites would want to. They would tech me. One race, the last race I really got kind of upset at was we were in where were we? We were on what's that river there in Detroit? Oh gosh. Anyway, the Detroit race, and after the race, the patrol boat came over, and we'd won the race, and the patrol boat came over, and I had to get off of the boat. They towed it into a warehouse and tore it apart. I mean, they tore the engine down, tore the drives off, cut holes in the bottom of the boat, cut holes in the top of the gas tank. They said, and then with the whole thing, the tech and all the guys, all the other drivers and guys were outside the warehouse telling them, look for this, look for that, look for this. Look for that. Never found anything because there was nothing to be found. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
literally nothing to be found. And so
Yeah.
about 3 o'clock in the morning, they said, "Well, here's your boat," and it was a friggin' mess. And and do you know a lady named Marilyn D. Martini?
Yeah. The PR lady.
Yeah, Marilyn.
Hmm.
She came up to me the next race and said, well, what'd you think of those guys taking your boat apart?" Well, I told them what I saw, so I got penalized that time too for saying that how I really felt about it, you know. So anyway, that's all. That's all. But the moral of the story is be prepared. And
Yeah.
I don't think like even today's NASCAR guys. I know a lot of the NASCAR people involved, and they have uh, a guy like Joe Gibbs or Hendrick. They have 500, 600 employees for four
Sure.
race cars.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
engineers looking for these little things, and NASCAR takes the winning car home with them every race, and they tear it down, and then they'll learn about it because they want every car to be the same. They want the parity to be the same. Well, I can understand that and in those levels. I just didn't understand it, why they were picking on me because I was, you know, spent the time to do it. If you're a weekend racer, then you're a weekend racer. But if you're not going to beat a professional guy like Johnny Tomlinson or Randy Sism or these kinds of guys, if they really put their mind to it, uh, they've got such knowledge and they've got customers that are willing to bankroll
Hmm.
what they want to do. I mean, so I can't imagine. Randy's done so well and making. And I understand that. They're still making as many boats as they could possibly make, just as fast as they can.
Yeah. Absolutely.
These fast boats. I mean, you
Yeah.
see them all out at Havasu, I'm sure, and
Oh my gosh.
the
Everywhere.
I don't know how many boats did they have at the
Desert
shootout this
Storm.
week at the Desert Storm this year.
It seems like every other boat that's out there, it's either an MTI or a DCB. It's crazy.
Yeah, MTI
Yeah.
DCB or a occasional skater.
Yeah. Yep.
You
Yep.
know, and I don't know if Nordic is making their cat anymore or not. Do you?
I think they still are. Yeah. I think they still are. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So, and there's a guy, Randy. He's done really well. Uh, and again, that comes from his ski racing that he likes to do, and his
Hmm.
partnership up with Mercury and everything that he's done. I mean, that boat that they run in the Enduro every year, you're not going to beat that boat until we figured it out a way with Greg. This was Greg's idea for with Al and John Ross building
Hmm. Hmm.
that 22-foot Stoker with the 450 on it.
Right. Right.
That proved to be a pretty good package. You have to know how to drive it, do everything, but for that matter, so does Randy's boat, because I mean, with the likes of Billy Dunsmore and Gordy, uh, two of the best guys that you could possibly get as drivers for that boat. That boat's incredible. That boat, that thing's at least 130-mile-an-hour boat.
Oh yeah. 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 Yeah.
At least 130. So anyway, I'm really proud of the industry, of what's happened over the years and how it's evolved, and I really get a big kick out of watching on YouTube the Australians, what those guys are.
Oh, are they
What?
impressive? Is that
Oh
the
my
most
God!
impressive thing?
It, it's borderline suicidal though for those kids skiing 130 miles an hour, but the engine packages and boats that they have and everything, and
Yeah.
I hate to toot my own horn on some things, but I think that's probably why you wanted me to talk. But I had years and years and years ago, about 40 years ago at this point, I was building a lot of water ski race boats out of the Spectra molds for
Mm-hmm.
two guys, Vic Edelbrock and Jerry Herbst.
Mm-hmm.
And we were really heavy into ski racing. And uh, and I was just switching from ski racing and building these boats and my GN racing, and when I started getting into the Al Copeland offshore stuff, and then with Matt Alcone and these guys. But uh, I told Jerry, I said, I think that the way to go in the future of this whole thing is out drives. Everybody had a V drive, and either had a Hallett or a Chiata or a GMT or something like that for ski racing here in the States. with a supercharged motor in it or turbos. And I told Jerry, I said, I think I can build you a boat. And in our Jerry's ski race boats and Edelbrock's boat would go probably about 115 at the time. 19-foot Spectre with a supercharged motor on it at auto, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I built Jerry a 19-foot. I did some inserting in the molds and stuff. And I built him a 19-foot GMT with an outdrive on it. This was a number 2 Speedmaster.
Mm-hmm.
This was in This was been about 1983, something like
Something
that.
like that.
Keith
Small
Black
block,
built
right?
an all aluminum small block for it.
Mm-hmm.
They still have it. The Herbsts still have
Do
that boat.
they?
They still have it.
Yeah.
And I brought it out, and Jerry said, "Just build me the boat." I said, "Just bring it out to Las Vegas." And I'd never forget it. We brought it out for the 75 miler. They had every year, Memorial Weekend Labor Day weekend. Then it was the 75-mile ski race, and they had a 50 miler. And
Mm-hmm.
anyway, and I brought that little IO boat out. They call it the little IO boat out there, and everybody kind of laughed at it. And it's a little teeny motor and everything like that. But anyways, that boat would run 125.
Mm-hmm.
And
I was ski racing at the time. I remember when that boat showed up, and I
okay,
remember,
okay.
that was really cool. And your rigging at the time, I mean, your rigging was really cool, different than everybody else's.
I made a drop box transmission for it because there wasn't any welded up small drives at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so anyways, so that boat's turnkey.
Oh, that's cool.
Sitting in a warehouse, and that's one that Tim and Troy said that I can have as soon as I get my warehouse done for my museum, that they'll let me have that boat, put that boat on loan to me to display. So it's just exactly the way we had it.
Nice.
Yeah.
I guess if we can find some pictures of that. It was a really trick boat, really cool.
But yeah, I probably have some somewhere. I don't know.
We moved on, but back to the Copeland, the 8 outboard thing. The engineering, do you have any pictures of that? I mean, the engineering on that. Oh my gosh,
yeah.
that'd be amazing to see.
Oh yeah,
the engineering and all that.
I have a whole book on it.
Oh wow, I gotta get my eyes on that.
From building the dyno, I built a little engine stand so I could
Did
run
you?
each engines to make sure that they would run and idle, and then to prove to Mercury, I made all the parts, shipped some power heads back to Mercury, and we dynoed one engine on its side, then 2 engines on their sides, and we went all the way to 3 and lined them all up inside the dyno cell at Plant 12 in Mercury to show that the engines really didn't fight each other because, again, the Gilmer belt, the blower belts really helped kind of dampen the loading and unloading of the engines. And so that was really part of the secret of holding that whole thing together. So, and much like these guys, but they're ridiculous now, but those tractor pull guys that have 4 or 5 motors on and all that, and that SCS gearbox guy helps make all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyways, that was what it held together. And we never really had any trouble with, the only trouble that we ever would have is in testing, if one of the motors would blow up for whatever reason, it would want to set the, it would spark and want to set the thing on fire, which eventually was what happened to that boat. It finally caught on fire, and in a second run they were trying to do on a kilo thing, and it caught on fire and burned up.
Oh no!
Good part of it, but I wasn't there. I was over in Japan racing at the time, and I asked them don't do it, but they did it anyway. And
man,
yeah.
So, like, when you drew that thing up on a napkin, man, how hard was it to sell that to Copeland, or was he all in?
Well, the good news, as I said, my mentor at the time was Bill Soroy, and Bill, between Bill, mostly Bill, and I as backup, if we went to Al and said, this is what's going to happen, Al would say, well, he'd want us to almost guarantee it. But so we did it as we'd stuck our necks out as far as we could, but
Mm-hmm.
Bill and I both we decided that we could do all this if given the budget to do it correctly, and Al would supply that. And that's the same way with later on in my career with Matt Alcone. He would supply the budget, and we would discuss things. And Al, for when he would want to just blow steam, he'd give us a call, and we'd talk. He'd talk all night about, well, okay, if we do this, how fast would I go? Or if I do that, how fast would I go? When can I have it? Or how much is it going to cost? You know, these kinds of things. Uh, he wanted to try it all, and he wanted to lead it. So a little story on him before, Al came out with changed the rules for the APBA for superboat. There were nothing called a superboat where you could put 4 motors in a boat and go racing 50 foot. At the time, class 1 was 2 500 cubic inch motors in a catamaran, and I think it was like 40 foot was the limit.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that you would create a class is that the general membership would vote on it, and and the only people that could vote on whether a class would work or not would be the people that signed up for the class or registered a boat.
Mm-hmm.
So Al figured out that there was only 10 registered open class boats racing. So he registered 20 of his employees as owners when it came time to vote. So they voted in Superboat.
Oh
Now,
my God.
I mean, I think that's kind of the way politics works, but that did that.
Yeah.
So again, those were the good old days when you could do stuff like that. But on the
Yeah.
other hand, there was other people like I said that we talked about that had the wherewithal, like Tom Gentry. Probably, if the truth were known, no one spent more money than Tom Gentry in offshore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, can you imagine? Or maybe Victory Team, years later.
Right. Right.
But like I said, when you see a place with 200 motors in it, and a neat thing about Tom is he'd get his engine guys going one direction. They'd build 20 motors, something like that. He'd get about 3/4 of the way done with them, and he'd come up with a better idea.
Oh
He wouldn't
no.
tear those motors apart. He'd set them aside and build more new motors.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
and he was writing the checks for all that.
Yeah.
Now, and Freddie Miller. Did you know Fred Miller?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I
Freddie
know
was
of him, obviously.
Freddie was his guy, and Dunsmore,
Uh-huh.
Dunsmore Senior, did the turbo thing with him, and now that's what all the stuff that Carson Pruitt has now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think Carson's taken it well
Oh my
beyond
gosh,
what.
crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Carson is great. And as a matter of fact, my very first job as when I got a paycheck was sanding wooden boats for Lou Brummett, Carson's father, before Carson was born.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Wow.
the same house that Carson lives in today.
Does he really? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've ever been to his place in Pasadena
I
there.
haven't. I've been
Yeah.
chasing Carson almost as long as I've been chasing you. So I'm gonna
Oh,
get him.
well,
I'm gonna get him one of these days.
yeah. Well, his dad, he's a good guy. He was my father's best friend.
Oh, no kidding.
In
Yeah.
boats, yeah. Our
Yeah.
first boat that my dad ever bought, when he had enough money to buy one, was a Mandela,
Mm.
a 16-foot Mandela. And I've been looking for that boat, and I thought I'd found it, but it turned out not to be the original boat. So
Wow.
I'm looking
Wow.
for with the original that one. And the original, my dad had a center seat one like rawhide
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Mandela. I
Uh-huh.
don't know. I can't find whatever happened to that boat. I
Hmm.
know that I cut the deck of it off of it and put a wooden deck on it, a long wood deck, and that the guy that I sold it to has passed on, and nobody knows where that boat went.
Hmm.
I'd like to find that boat.
Hmm.
But of my collection of boats, all of them have a meaning. Like I have the original Boomerang. My long deck Mandela that I have is the
Mm-hmm.
original Boomerang boat that I skied the Catalina ski race behind.
Oh,
Lou,
no kidding.
Lou, the first year I rode as an observer for Mike Dixon. don't know if you knew Mike Dixon.
I knew Mike Dixon. I actually was when I was growing up, we were in a San Gabriel Valley Boat and Ski Club with Mike Dixon and
Oh,
Fred
okay.
Inman, and yeah,
Okay. Well,
yep, yep.
so Mike skied, and I observed, and Lou had a Boy Scout compass around his neck. A little thing was about size of a silver dollar, and he had a flask of whiskey, and he'd take a squirt of the whiskey and look at his compass, and we'd go straight. And we went straight over there, straight back, and I think we ended up getting third because the other guys came in the wrong breakwater. Butch Peterson and Rick Fowler
Mm,
came in the wrong jetty. No,
hmm
excuse me, it wasn't Rick Fowler. It was Chuck Stearns. Names of the past. My heroes.
Mike Dixon was so good. I don't even know if he ever won Catalina. I think he got second like a bunch of times or something.
Well, Jerry Herbst pulled him a bunch of times, and no,
Oh yeah,
I
okay.
I don't know if they. I don't think so. I mean, you can look it up, but I don't think that they ever did. I think you're right. Second was the best that he ever did.
Yeah, I
So,
think he won. I think he won everything else. But he was the guy when I was growing up. When I first started ski racing, I was like 8, 9 years old, and he was just unbelievable. It was amazing how
oh yeah, he
fast he
was
was.
really good. He was really good. He was a
Yeah.
good guy. He looked after us. He was a few years older than I was,
hmm
and he looked after us. He got his driver's license so we could hang out together, and go everything. So that's why
yeah.
I was a pain in the ass to everybody because I so much. And then uh, another guy that I think is a mentor that is long gone it was a guy named Tim Wallace, a boat called Tiny Tim. They won the Parker Enduro twice as an inboard, won the Salton Sea 500.
hmm
Anyways, when I wasn't old enough to drive, my mother would drive me down to Tim's house, and Tim and I'd work on a boat, and I'd work with him. And Tim was an older guy at the time, so I could get up under the deck and do things for him, and I learned a lot from him as far as how to do some kind of rigging parts.
hmm
And I never forget it, whatever was the hardest bolt in the boat to get to, Tim would want it drilled and counter keyed, not safety, counter keyed, because he'd never wanted to see that bolt again. And sometimes we'd work
Okay.
2 or 3 nights on just
hmm
that one bolt up
hmm
under the deck or something. So
Yeah.
that's how he looked into everything he could. That's why he didn't break down during the races. Another thing I did in my career, I don't know if you can kind of put this together. Uh, I worked after school for Andy Casale for a number of years
Did you?
at building V drives. And so that's how I got my knowledge. And once I got tired of building V drives, I went in and I started drawing V drives. And Andy paid me I wasn't an engineer, but I did drawings. And Andy, I learned a lot from him on,
hmm
Andy was not a graduate engineer, but he was certainly a engineer of a graduate of the School of Hard Knocks,
Yeah. Right. Right.
right?
And I
And
mean, and yeah, and all the stuff even today, all the stuff that he's done, V drives, you Google, I mean, just the different projects, the off road, I mean, it's all kinds of
no,
stuff,
that's true. Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely true. And how it all crossed over, and that's how it helped me. Like I said, to with the people that I knew in the industries and my father connected with, I could pretty much get anything I needed. At least we'd go to breakfast somewhere, and on a sheet of paper, draw on a napkin what we were talking about, and a few days later, you get a phone call. Come on over. I got something I want to show you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this
Yeah.
what you were talking about?
Yeah.
And so yeah.
And I mean, you were good at making stuff work. So once guys saw that you could make stuff work, you got that, the reliability, and they would take a chance on it.
Well, yeah, but it didn't always come easy. It would take a guy to give you one, the budget to do it, and also the confidence in you to keep going. Because I remember, for an example, we haven't talked about Matt Alcone, but he was a huge influence in my offshore racing that let me go to. I could just anything I wanted to do, I could do as long as
hmm
it was safer and made the boat go faster. But during the days of offshore or any racing for that matter, guys didn't test that much before a race because they didn't want to blow their motors up. Well, Matt didn't know anything about motors. He didn't know anything about boats, for that matter, but he knew how to do business. And he said if we're creating a motor that we don't have the confidence even to go test in, why would we even consider racing it?
Right.
So we
Right.
got to prove that this is right. So I remember I built a boat, and he said, Jerry, I'm tired of going to the races and breaking down right away. He says, and you always say, well, I think I got it. I think I got it. He says, take the team, take the truck, take the trailer, take all the engines that we have, go to Sarasota Bay, and don't call me until you can make that boat run wide open for an hour.
Hmm.
And he says, and I mean wide open. I said,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, I can do that right away. Well, it took me 3 weeks just eliminating, changing things, fuel pumps, trim pumps, mounting them differently, adding, cool air to the brain box, to EFI
Mm-hmm.
boxes, stuff like that, so that we were so reliable. Because that's why one thing about the reliability of the Alco in the last few years, that we never broke down.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also could go out the day before the race and just run the piss out of it and not worry about anything going on, because I could get my setup exactly the way I needed it. The
Mm-hmm.
other guys were afraid to go out there because they didn't want to blow up their motors,
Gotcha.
right? Well,
Yeah.
so I had a truck full of motors. I didn't need to be worried about if it was going to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
blow up. But the lead in on this story was because Mercury at the time, I was the Mercury guy, and then Mercury had the 1000, and I said, I want to build a bigger boat, and I'm going to need more power. They said, well, Mercury's pretty stubborn, and they hadn't come out with a 1350 or anything like that. They had the 1000. So I met Mike DeAnnabelle from Sterling,
Certainly. Yeah.
and I told Mike, I said, the engine I would like to have, no one's ever built. I'd like to take your open class motor, which he was dominating at that time. I'd like to have an open class motor with a supercharger on it, and maybe a little more cubic inches. So we built some of those. We built some of those. I think we built 6 motors to start. Long story short, after about 2 races after we rigged this boat, I had a pile of trash. We didn't have one motor that would run. The boat didn't run. I got called. I didn't get called into Matt's office very often, but he called me in and he goes, Jerry, he goes, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? And I told him, I said, I have all the confidence in the world of where we're headed. And I said, DeAnnabelle built a motor. I wanted 1,300 horsepower. That was what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
He built a 1,600 horsepower motor, but everything was on kill. And so the more we detuned it, the longer it lasted.
Mm-hmm.
So
Of
anyways,
course.
we ended up right back at that 1,300 horsepower, and it would run forever. And so I told Matt that. I said, we're going to get it, and you're going to, in the long run, you're going to save motor rebuilds and stuff. You'll be able to run these motors 2 races instead of rebuild them
Mm-hmm.
after every race. They go, okay, then go on. So, $3 million later, we got it. That's how much he spent on just developing the Alcone open Supercat motor. And so that worked out with, the intercoolers and the different type of, instead of having aluminum intercoolers, we had, the Inconel or whatever it's called,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that Carson uses today.
Sure. Yeah.
But back in those days, though, our Sterling motors were about 75,000 a piece.
Oh my
I
gosh.
don't know what a Carson Brummett motor is now, but I heard a lot.
Yeah.
So,
Like these motors he's building for these guys at these shootouts. I mean, just so sophisticated, and the fuel injection, electronics is just
oh my
crazy.
God. Oh yeah. Yeah. Did you ever see? I haven't seen the boat since Mike King said they've run it. The Chiata that Mike King did, that Carson did a
No,
Hemi
with the
Chrysler,
Chrysler.
the Chrysler in it,
No,
and
so
then
I
I
don't know
heard
if
it
you.
sold.
Yeah, before the guy that built it ever ran the thing, somebody else bought it. And I actually talked to Mike the other day because I've been trying to get some pictures of it and do a magazine article on it. And Mike said the guy was still hadn't had it in the water, or hadn't really dialed it in. So the guy was waiting for Carson, and Stan from Shaw to get out and run it with him, and might have Mike get down there. So that was the last he told me. That was about 2 weeks ago. So, but yeah, I found they somebody did a little video on that boat. Unbelievable. That thing is just unbelievable.
I
I
lost
can't.
you.
Yeah, that thing was just unbelievable. I saw a video on it, just beautiful. But I can't imagine what that engine cost. I can't even imagine what the CMI headers for a Chrysler must have cost.
Well, I can tell you that because I had a Chrysler with a couple of CMI headers
Yeah.
built for it. But I would think those. Well, I couldn't guess. I'm probably 30 grand.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah, post COVID money too, right?
yeah. But yeah, I saw the motor at Carson's, and then I saw the boat at. I've never seen the motor and the boat together.
I'll have to send you a picture. There's some pictures of it on the internet. It's beautiful. It's unbelievable.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah.
it is.
So,
Everything that I saw was fantastic, and again, I haven't heard. I heard it had sold, and for a pretty good number.
yeah, pretty astronomical.
Yeah. I have guys call me every once in a while that want to buy the Lamborghini boat, but I don't think I want to sell any of my boats.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a Joe Gibbs Toyota NASCAR motor and a Beesmeyer.
Oh,
So
I think I forgot about that. I think I did
yeah,
know
I
that.
have
Yeah.
that one. That's a special motor. That motor won the Homestead race at Kyle
Wow.
Bushgrove. So
Uh-huh.
that's the last of the unlimited open rules motors for
For NASCAR.
NASCAR. Yeah, this thing made over 900 horsepower.
Wow.
Yeah, for 358 cubic inch naturally aspirated.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. You
Yeah.
know, but I don't know how much it cost.
Yeah.
But I know Toyota wants it back. But they're not giving it.
I don't know if you ever talk to Duff Daly or stay in touch with Duff Daly, but his kid's got a it's like a SE boat. Duff's big Chrysler guy, so he found I can't remember the name of it, but it's a Chrysler NASCAR motor that he put in his kid's SE boat.
I know he has. I know he had the boat. I thought he had a small block Chevy in it.
I think it came with a small block Chevy, but Duff found I can't remember what the Chrysler name is for it, but it's a NASCAR Chrysler. And yeah, because Duff was a Chrysler guy, and he had some, yeah,
A Ray Abraham motor.
yeah, he
Yeah,
had some
yeah.
he had some 180 headers made for it,
Headers
and
made for it.
yeah. But
Yeah, Duff was telling me about it that he found it. This is the motor that the guys run in the 6-liter class in Australia.
okay.
Yeah, it's an Abraham Dodge.
Yeah. But I think he said the thing off the trailer because he was going to run it in the 105 GPS class. I think it ran like 118 or 120 miles an hour off the trailer. He's like,
yeah.
But
Well, that's the boat that Paul Fitzgerald runs in that 105 class. It'll run 120. I know it will. I know it will. So
yeah.
I've tested with him, and but that again. For what's happening in boat racing right now, I just not sure. I mean, I don't know. You probably have a better grasp of what's happening from the future. I mean, is the future 50-foot, 180 mile an hour pleasure boats for guys? Because they've kind of overrun Havasu, I think, at this point.
Yeah, man, I don't know, Jerry. I don't know. I don't think anybody thought it would get to where it's gotten. I mean, $1 million, 160-mile-an-hour boats, dozens of them.
Dozens of them, absolute dozens of them, and it's crazy. I don't know how many. I don't know where Mercury what they were trying to do, or where they wanted to go when they came up with the 1350. I mean, they certainly changed the. I mean, where you could that kind of power and last that long is pretty good. I think one of the reasons that it does is that because they have that alarm system on it, that Guardian mode that saves a lot of problems.
Oh yeah.
So but again, without all the computer stuff, though, you would never be able to have that.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Well, and now, I mean, it's almost as grandiose as a 500 horsepower V8 outboard.
Right. Yeah,
Those things are pretty amazing.
I have a V8. I have a V8 Mercury on my pontoon boat. Just because I wanted one, I didn't realize they were going to have them come out, and the next time come out with a V10 and then a V12 and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know. I get calls from buddies that want to know what I know about all that stuff. I know nothing about any of that stuff. Absolutely nothing about it. But boy, they've obviously cornered the market. That's for sure. I mean, that's all you see out there. I mean, around here in Newport Beach, that's all you see is those Verados. They're everywhere.
Yeah.
4 and 5 of them on the backs of these boats.
Yeah. It's pretty unbelievable. And so I was talking to Bob Brown the other day, and we were talking about like OMC, like Evan Johnson Evinrude, for a company that size to just disappear. You know, they pretty much kicked their ass 100%.
Yeah, for sure. Think of the, I don't know what boat. What's more popular now? The twin 500 Cat outboards or the big power Cat with inboards? The big money guys probably have both. The Desert Storm. Were there more outboards Cats out there than inboard Cats?
I think by far now. And I know Freddie over at IMCO is saying like they went from 80% stern drive stuff a few years ago to 80% outboard stuff now. Like it's just, the other part was just rigging time because you can't get help. They had so many boats sold, they couldn't get anything built. And you can build, you can throw outboards on there so much faster. It was almost, hey, I can get you outboards built in 3 months, but if you want a stern drive boat, it's going to be 6 or 8 months.
How fast are these guys going now? I've heard 125 is not unreasonable with a twin outboard now.
Oh no, not at all. I think anything with a twin outboard's at least 110 to 120 at least.
Yeah. And so any Tom, Dick, and Harry can buy one of those. And a boat like a DCB like that or the MTI, they're over $1 million now, aren't they?
I think the bigger ones, and if you get up to the 40s and 50 footers, and you put two, because I think a 500 motor's like $80,000-$90,000, something like that.
Well,
crazy.
Yeah. And the props are $11,000 a piece.
Oh my gosh, crazy. Like we said, post-COVID money. I mean, interior, everything's insane. So.
Right. Well, people are making the money, or else they wouldn't be able to afford to buy it.
Well, how you doing? I think I'm going to let you go, man. I think I kept you way longer than I thought I was going to get to keep you.
Well, you can call me anytime. If this is all just a shoot the breeze, if you want to do it again and do it better, we can do that and maybe make it a little bit more adaptable as my career went along. We just kind of started talking about stuff.
No, I tell you, Jerry, this was amazing. It was awesome. Really, really cool. I really appreciate it. So,
okay. Well, I don't want to come across as too strong. I just what it is.
Jerry, it's perfect, man. And I mean, you've got all the credentials. You can be any way you want, and you're very humble and giving credit to other people, and it's awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you. All right, we'll keep in touch.
Thank you, Jerry. I sure will. Appreciate it. Take care of yourself.
All right. Yeah, bye.
Thank you for listening to Powerboat Talk. If you like what you've heard, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star review. For more Powerboat Talk, follow us on Facebook or Instagram, or visit our website at powerboattalk.com.